Hello, welcome back to the Phantom Diary channel. I'm sure there are many of you listening to my stories to fall asleep. Before we start, write in the comments what country you're listening from. If you feel fear, you should like and subscribe this channel. Let's go. I never wanted to camp in the swamp, but Kevin? He loved weird, forgotten places. It'll be beautiful, he said. No tourists, just us in the wild. Total silence, pure nature. He made it sound like a dream. I should have known better. Nothing. Silent ever stays peaceful. We were 5. Kevin, his sister Amy, my cousin Joel, and me. We were all close, always chasing the next cool adventure. So, when Kevin found an old wildlife refuge deep in the south, barely marked on the map, we loaded the SUV with gear and drove 6 hours to nowhere. The road ended in dirt. Then the dirt became ruts, and finally we parked and hiked the rest of the way in. Packs heavy, mosquitoes thick, and the air growing wet and heavy with each step. By the time we reached the clearing Kevin had scouted, we were drenched in sweat, legs streaked with mud and cattail fluff. The swamp surrounded us, endless and alive. Towering cypress trees rose from the water like cathedral columns, draped in ghostly Spanish moss that swayed without wind. The ground beneath our feet pulsed with the weight of generations. Frogs croaked deep in their throats, and birds occasionally shrieked high overhead, but mostly it was quiet. Eerily so. Kevin picked the campsite just off a narrow boardwalk that once belonged to some long-abandoned nature preserve. We found rotting trail signs half swallowed by weeds, and a collapsed ranger station swallowed by vines. Still, once the tents were up and the fire going, the place took on a strange beauty. Shadows danced on the water. Fireflies blinked like scattered stars. Kevin was right. It was remote, undisturbed. We were alone, or so we thought. That night, around the fire, Amy mentioned something odd. "Did any of you hear that whistling earlier?" I looked up. "What whistling?" "Out past the trees. Real soft, like someone blowing across the top of a bottle." We all paused. Kevin grinned. "Swamp gas." "Swamp gas doesn't whistle," Joel muttered. We joked it away, but I kept listening. And when I laid down in my tent later, the forest felt closer, as if the trees had leaned in, like the moss was listening. Around 2 a.m., I woke to the soft sound of footsteps squishing through the muck. Not animals. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. I held my breath. Something moved just outside the tent. Never close enough to see, but I could feel it. Not one of us. Not even something trying to hide. It wanted us to hear it. The steps stopped. Then a low hum started, long, droning, like someone humming a lullaby in the dark. I wanted to wake Kevin, but I couldn't move, couldn't even call out. The next morning, none of us mentioned anything, but we all looked tired, like we'd seen something in our dreams. We couldn't shake. At breakfast, Joel stared into the trees and said, "There's someone out there." He didn't elaborate. No one asked him to. We spent the day hiking deeper into the swamp, following what was left of the old boardwalk. The deeper we went, the more unnatural it felt. Trees grew too closely. Water rippled without cause. Strange. Objects drifted just under the surface. Shapes that looked like dolls, maybe, or bones. At one point, Amy stopped suddenly. "Do you smell that?" It was faint, but unmistakable. Flowers. Not the sweet smell of blossoms, but something older, rotten and sweet, like lilies left too long in stagnant water. None of us could find the source. That night, the whistling returned. First, far off, then nearer. Kevin stood near the fire, flashlight scanning the tree line, daring someone, something, to step into view. "Probably just a raccoon," he said, "but raccoons don't whistle lullabies." Then the lights started, flickering between the trees, pale blue, like lanterns floating just above the water. Will-o'-the-wisps, Amy whispered. We watched, silent as the lights drifted in patterns that felt purposeful, intelligent. Then came the voice. It was soft, female, singing a song none of us knew in a language that didn't quite sound human. The notes bent strangely, like they didn't belong in our world. Kevin dropped his flashlight. Back to the tents, I said. No one argued. I didn't sleep. The song wove through the night air, echoing in my skull, laced with a sadness I couldn't. Oh, explain. Just before dawn, everything stopped. The swamp went dead still, and then we heard it. One last sound. A deep breath, drawn by something enormous just beyond sight, as if the forest itself exhaled through ancient lungs. We left that morning. No one talked during the hike back. The silence hung heavy, not out of fear, but reverence, like we'd trespassed and been allowed to leave. As we drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Standing in the middle of the road, far behind us, was a figure cloaked in moss, face pale, and blurred like the surface of still water. Watching. She didn't move. She didn't have to. Back home, Kevin tried to look up the swamp's history. The preserve had closed decades ago, with little documentation. But we did find one thing. A local legend about a woman known as the Mourner, a widow who walked the swamp at night searching for her lost children, calling them with song. Some say she died in that swamp, others say she never left. Whatever we heard out there, it wasn't meant for us, but it let us go, and we haven't gone back. Not because we're afraid, because we don't want to disturb the silence again. I never thought a swamp could feel so alive, and so haunted all at once. My friends and I had planned this weekend getaway to escape the city's suffocating noise. We wanted something raw and wild, so we chose Blackwater Swamp, a vast, murky stretch of wetlands a few hours from town. We'd heard the stories. Locals whispered about strange lights, eerie sounds, and vanished travelers, but none of that mattered to us. We were city kids, craving adventure. We arrived late afternoon, the sun already dipping low behind the moss-draped cypress trees. The swamp stretched endlessly, water dark and still, dotted with lily pads and tangled roots. A thick fog rolled in, creeping like a living thing over the water's surface. We found a small, dry patch near an old wooden dock, perfect for setting up camp. The air smelled damp and heavy, a mix of earth, decay, and something else. Something faintly metallic, like rust. As we unpacked, I noticed the swamp seemed unnaturally quiet. No frogs croaked, no birds sang. The usual swamp orchestra was missing, replaced by a suffocating silence. It felt as if the swamp was holding its breath. Night fell quickly, shadows thickening like ink. We gathered around a campfire, its flames weak against the overwhelming darkness. The firelight flickered, casting grotesque shapes on the surrounding trees draped with Spanish moss. We tried to ignore the silence. Instead, we told stories, ghost tales and legends about Blackwater. One local myth stuck with me. The tale of a woman called the Swamp Witch, said to wander the waters at night, her pale face glimpsed through the mist, eyes glowing like embers. As the fire crackled, I thought I caught a glimpse of something, a flicker of white, just beyond, the tree line. I blinked, but it was gone. My friends laughed it off, but unease settled deep in my chest. Then came the sounds. Soft at first, a distant splash, like something moving through the water, then a faint whispering, almost like voices carried on the fog too faint to understand. I stood up, the firelight trembling in my hands. "Did you hear that?" I asked. Mark shrugged. "It's probably just animals." But I wasn't convinced. The whispering grew. winding through the trees and moss like smoke. The swamp seemed to come alive, the air thickening with an unseen presence. I scanned the dark edges of the camp, heart pounding. Suddenly, a figure appeared. A woman, dressed in tattered white, standing motionless at the water's edge. Her skin was pale and glowing faintly in the firelight, her eyes reflecting. "The flames!" I froze. "Is that—" Lisa whispered. Before anyone could move, the woman turned slowly and vanished into the fog, leaving behind a cold silence. The whispering stopped. We sat silently, the fire burning low, none of us daring to speak. Sleep came fitfully, with dreams, haunted by glowing eyes and watery shadows. At dawn, the swamp seemed ordinary again. Birds chirping, frogs croaking, the thick fog lifting like a curtain. We packed up quickly, leaving behind the eerie quiet and its ghostly visitor. Though we escaped unharmed, I still hear the swamp's whispers at night, and sometimes, when the mist rolls in, I swear I see that pale figure watching from the shadows. Blackwater Swamp is alive, and it remembers. I never believed in the old stories about Blackwater Swamp. People in town whispered of strange lights, eerie sounds, and shadowy figures lurking among the cypress knees, but I figured it was just a superstition. Tales spun to keep curious kids away from the dangerous swamp. So, when my friends and I planned a weekend camping trip in the swamp's outskirts, I was excited. I wanted to see it with my own eyes, to experience the place that sparked so many legends. We packed our gear, loaded the canoe, and set off just before sunset, ready for an adventure. The swamp was unlike anything I'd seen before. Thick fog hugged the water's surface, curling around gnarled trees whose twisted branches hung low like skeletal arms. The air was heavy with humidity and the pungent scent of wet earth and decaying leaves. As we paddled deeper, the sounds of frogs and insects surrounded us in a wild symphony, broken only by the occasional splash of a fish or turtle sliding beneath the surface. We found a small island, just big enough for our tents, nestled among towering cypress trees draped with gray Spanish moss. Setting up camp was tricky in the soft mud, but we managed, and soon a fire flickered, casting warm light into the cold night air. Around the fire, we told ghost stories and laughed nervously, trying to shake the feeling that the swamp was watching us. I admit, the stories took on new weight in this place. The idea that unseen eyes might be following us seemed less silly. Later, as the fire crackled, I wandered away from the group to explore the edge of the island. The swamp stretched out, black water reflecting the moonlight like glass, dotted with strange shapes, floating logs, thick reeds, and tangled roots reaching out of the water like grasping fingers. That's when I noticed the light. A pale glow flickered in the distance, far across the swamp. It wasn't the fire, and it wasn't the moon. It was something else, a shifting, dancing light, too bright and too deliberate to be natural. I called out to my friends, but they were busy roasting marshmallows. Curious, I climbed into the canoe and began to paddle toward the light, heart pounding with a mix of fear and fascination. The swamp grew darker as I moved away from the fire, and the fog thickened, swirling around me like living smoke. The light flickered again, and then I saw it. A figure standing among the cypress knees near the water's edge. It was pale, almost translucent, draped in ragged white cloth that fluttered even though there was no wind. Its face was hidden beneath a veil of moss and shadow, but I felt its eyes, cold, ancient eyes, locked on me. I froze, breath caught in my throat. The figure lifted a hand, pointing slowly toward the deeper swamp. I understood somehow that it wasn't a threat, but a warning. I nodded, even though it couldn't see me, and slowly backed the canoe away. The whispering started then, a low, susurrating sound, like the rustle of leaves or the murmur of water over roots. It surrounded me, wrapping around my mind, but the words were impossible to grasp. The figure vanished as suddenly as it appeared, leaving only the eerie glow fading into darkness. I paddled back, heart racing, and as I reached the island, the whispering faded. My friends looked up, concern etched on their faces. "Where were you?" Lisa asked. "I saw something," I said quietly. "Something in the swamp." We spent the rest of the night around the fire, the shadows dancing taller and darker as the flames flickered. None of us spoke of the figure, but the feeling lingered, a reminder that the swamp held secrets older than any of us. When morning came, the swamp looked peaceful, almost inviting in the pale dawn light. We packed up quickly, eager to leave, but respectful of the strange presence we'd felt. As we paddled away, I glanced back once more. Among the trees, in the mist, I thought I saw a pair of eyes watching us, glowing faintly like distant stars. And I knew some things in Blackwater Swamp were meant to be left alone. I've always been fascinated by swamps. Maybe it's the way the thick fog curls over the water at dawn, or the strange silence that falls when you stand still long enough to listen. So when my friends invited me on a weekend trip to explore the bayou, I didn't hesitate. It promised adventure, and as someone who loves the weird and wild, that was irresistible. We arrived late afternoon, the sun already sinking low behind twisted cypress trees draped in Spanish moss. Our small boat bobbed gently at the edge of the murky water, the smell of damp earth and decay heavy in the air. The swamp stretched endlessly in every direction, thick with gnarled roots, reeds, and the occasional flicker of movement just beneath the surface. Our plan was simple: camp on a small island at the heart of the swamp, tell stories by the fire, and experience the eerie beauty of this place. The locals had warned us. Tales of strange noises, flickering lights, and shadows moving where no one should be. But none of us believed in ghosts. Not really. As we pushed off from the dock and glided deeper into the swamp, a heavy stillness settled over us. The usual sounds of birds and insects were faint, as if swallowed by the thick air. Only the soft splash of the oars breaking the water's surface disturbed the silence. We reached the island just as twilight began to bleed into night. The ground was soft and damp beneath our boots, and the trees loomed like silent watchers. We set up camp quickly, gathering dry wood from fallen branches while the last light faded. The fire sputtered to life, casting flickering shadows across the dark water. We settled around it, passing a bottle of whiskey and swapping stories. The swamp around us seemed alive with hidden eyes and whispered secrets. It was then that I first heard the murmurs. At first, I thought it was just the wind through the moss or the water lapping at the shore, but the sounds grew clearer, soft voices, almost like chanting, rising and falling with the breeze. They weren't words I could understand, just haunting melodies that seemed to drift from every direction. I shivered, half thrilled, half unnerved. "Do you guys hear that?" I asked, looking around. Mark, ever the skeptic, laughed. "Probably just frogs or something." Lisa nodded, but her smile was tight. "It's weird, though, like the swamp is trying to talk." The murmurs rose and fell, wrapping around us like a living thing. I felt eyes on us, unseen but heavy. The firelight flickered violently, and for a moment, I thought I saw shapes, figures drifting just beyond the trees. I blinked, and they were gone. Night deepened. The swamp grew darker, the mist rising from the water like ghostly fingers. The whispers continued, sometimes close, sometimes distant. It was as if the swamp itself was alive, watching, waiting. We stayed close to the fire, voices low, hearts pounding with a mix of fear and wonder. The stories turned from jokes to hushed legends of bayou spirits, lost souls trapped between worlds, protectors of the swamp, or vengeful shadows born of the marsh. I couldn't tell what was real and what was just my imagination, but I didn't want to be alone in the dark. Suddenly, a splash echoed from the water's edge, followed by a low, mournful wail. We froze. The fire flickered again, and the shadows seemed to lean closer. Probably just an animal, Mark said quickly, though. His voice was shaky. I kept staring into the mist, searching for the source. And then I saw it. A pale figure, gliding across the water, shimmering faintly in the firelight. It was a woman, dressed in tattered white, her hair flowing like seaweed in the current. Her eyes were dark and endless. I wanted to scream or run, but I was rooted to the spot. The figure stopped at the water's edge, watching us silently for a long, breathless moment. Then, without a sound, she slipped beneath the surface and vanished. The murmurs grew louder, rising to a chorus of voices that echoed through the trees. My friends grabbed their flashlights and shone them around, but the swamp was empty again. Silent, except for the crackling fire and our quickening breaths. None of us slept that night. The swamp seemed to pulse with unseen life, the whispers wrapping around us like a shroud. We kept close together, eyes wide, listening to the haunting symphony of the bayou. When dawn finally broke, painting the sky with soft pinks and golds, the swamp returned to its peaceful guise. Birds sang, insects buzzed, and the fog lifted like a curtain. We packed up quickly, leaving the island behind, but the memory stayed with me. The ghostly woman, the endless whispers, the feeling of being watched by something ancient and unknowable. Still don't know what we saw in the swamp that night, but one thing is clear. Some places hold secrets that refuse to rest. The bayou song still echoes in my mind, a reminder that the swamp is never truly silent, and we were never truly alone. I never imagined I'd find myself deep in a swamp at dusk, the murky water bubbling softly under a blanket of thick fog. Yet there I was with my two closest friends, Mike and Sarah, pushing our small boat through the choking tangles of cypress knees and moss-draped trees. We'd come to explore the old legends of the Bayou Blackwater, stories whispered in the nearby town about strange sounds, eerie lights, and something lurking beneath the still water. I'll admit, I was skeptical. Ghost stories and swamp monsters seemed like the kind of things to scare tourists, nothing more. But after a day of hiking and hiking, the mist had begun to roll in thick and heavy, and the swamp took on a different character, one that sent a chill straight through my spine. We'd set out from the dock with high spirits, our boat loaded with cameras and flashlights. The sun was low, casting long, slanting rays through the moss hanging like curtains from ancient trees. Dragonflies flickered like tiny sparks above the water. Birds called softly in the distance. It was beautiful and peaceful, almost hypnotic. We paddled deeper into the swamp. The air grew cooler and the fog denser. The water mirrored the sky in dull black, broken only by occasional ripples. Shadows lengthened, twisting into shapes that danced just at the edge of vision. Mike grinned. "This is the perfect place for a ghost story, huh?" Sarah laughed nervously. "Let's just not get lost. I don't fancy spending the night out, here with swamp gators or whatever." I smiled, trying to shake off the growing unease. But then, as we floated past a cluster of cypress knees, I noticed something strange. Faint flickers of light, small and yellow, moving silently among the trees, like fireflies, but too steady and too many. "Do you guys see that?" I asked, pointing toward the lights. Mike adjusted his flashlight, sweeping it through the haze. "Must be some kind of bugs. Glowworms, maybe." But Sarah frowned. "Those don't look natural. They're too bright, almost like lanterns." Drifted closer, curiosity overpowering caution. The lights bobbed and weaved just beyond the reach of our beams, as if guiding us deeper into the swamp. The water grew shallower, the boat scraping against submerged roots. Then came the whispers. Soft at first, like the murmur of wind through the reeds, but clearer now, voices, distant but unmistakable. They didn't speak any words I could understand, but their tone was urgent, pleading almost. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. Mike nodded, gripping his paddle tight. Yeah, sounds like someone's calling. Sarah's eyes widened. This isn't normal, we should turn back. But the lights were mesmerizing, flickering ahead like tiny ghosts leading us on. Suddenly, from the fog emerged a figure, pale, almost translucent, draped in tattered white that seemed to float over the water. Her hair hung in long, wet strands, and her eyes glowed faintly with an unnatural light. I froze. My heart hammered so loudly I was sure the others heard it. The figure raised a hand, pointing toward the darkest part of the swamp. Mike whispered, "It's the swamp lady, the one from the stories." Sarah grabbed my arm. "We need to leave, now." But before we could move, the figure began to sing, a low, haunting melody that drifted across the water like a foghorn in the night. The song was both beautiful and terrifying, pulling at something deep inside me. The whispers grew louder, swirling around us like a living thing. I wanted to scream, to row back as fast as I could, but the swamp lady's voice held me there, suspended in a dreamlike trance. Then, as suddenly as she appeared, she vanished into the mist. The whispers faded. The lights blinked out. For a moment, nothing moved but the gentle ripple of the water and our ragged breaths. Mike broke the silence. "We should get out of here before something worse shows up." We paddled back quickly, the fog seeming to thicken, the swamp closing in like a giant, silent beast. But nothing else appeared. No creatures, no more lights, just the swamp's endless whispered secrets. When we finally reached the dock, dawn was just breaking. The eerie calm was replaced by the familiar sounds of morning birds and rustling leaves. None of us spoke about what we'd seen until hours later, safe and warm back at Mike's cabin. "I don't know what that was," I said quietly, "but I'm glad it stayed on the other side of the swamp." Sarah nodded. "Some things are better left undisturbed." And maybe she was right. Because no matter how much I try to convince myself it was all a trick of the light and sound, the memory of that glowing figure and her haunting song still lingers, and I know the swamp is still whispering, waiting for the next curious souls to come listen. I had never been particularly drawn to swamps. They always seemed like a place where sunlight went to die, a tangled wilderness of murky water, twisted trees, and rotting vegetation. But when my friends invited me on a weekend trip to Blackwater, swamp, I agreed. I figured it'd be an adventure, something different. And besides, the swamp had a local reputation for strange sounds and ghost stories that intrigued me more than scared me. We arrived late afternoon, the sky a thick quilt of gray clouds. The air was heavy and humid, thick with the scent of wet, earth, and decay. A low mist drifted over the shallow pools, wrapping the twisted cypress knees in a ghostly veil. The swamp was quiet, too quiet. No birds sang, no insects buzzed. It felt like the swamp itself was holding its breath. We set up camp on a small patch of raised ground surrounded by waterlogged trees. The fire crackled, pushing back the creeping darkness and filling the air with smoke and the comforting smell of burning wood. As night fell, the swamp came alive, not with the usual sounds of nature, but with something else. Faint whispers floated on the damp breeze, barely audible but unmistakably there. At first, I thought it was just the wind threading through the branches and leaves, but the voices felt too rhythmic, too deliberate. I looked over at my friends who were poking the fire and chatting nervously. "Do you hear that?" I asked. Mark shook his head. "Hear what?" "Whispers. Like someone talking, but I can't make out the words." Lisa's smile faltered. "You're letting the stories get to you. It's just the swamp." But I wasn't convinced. The whispers grew louder, circling us like an invisible fog. They seemed to rise from the black water itself, twisting and curling through the trees. I stood and walked to the edge of the camp. The swamp stretched out before me. Dark pools reflecting the moonlight, twisted trees reaching up like skeletal, hands and patches of thick mist weaving between them. Then I saw it, a faint glow, flickering far in the distance. At first, I thought it was fireflies, but it was too steady, too deliberate. A pale blue light bobbing just above the water. "Guys, look," I whispered urgently, pointing toward the glow. They followed, my gaze, eyes widening. "What is that?" Lisa breathed. Without thinking, I stepped closer to the water's edge, drawn by the eerie light. The whispering grew louder, like a song just out of reach. My heart pounded, but I couldn't look away. Suddenly, the glow pulsed and floated toward me. It wasn't fireflies. It was something else, something alive, but not quite human. A figure draped in tattered white robes drifting over the water's surface. Its face was pale and featureless, save for two hollow eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness. I froze. The figure stopped, hovering inches from the water. Then it slowly raised a hand, pointing toward the forest beyond. I blinked. The figure vanished. I stumbled back to camp, breath shaking. "Did you see that?" I asked, voice barely audible. Mark and Lisa nodded, pale faces reflecting the firelight. "We should leave," Lisa said, voice trembling. But I was curious. I wanted to understand what I had seen. The swamp held secrets, ancient and deep, and I was standing at their edge. We spent the rest of the night watching the swamp, the whispers never quite fading. The figure never returned, but the feeling of being watched never left. By morning, the swamp seemed normal again. Birds sang, insects buzzed, and the mist lifted. We packed up quickly, leaving behind the murmurs and shadows. As we drove away, I looked back once more. The swamp was still, silent, but I knew the whispers hadn't stopped. They were waiting, patient and eternal, in the depths of Blackwater Swamp. And I wasn't sure if I ever wanted to return. I never believed in swamp stories. You know, the legends people tell to scare kids. Creatures lurking beneath the water, ghosts wandering among the cypress trees, things you shouldn't see but always feel watching you. Growing up near the edge of Raven's Hollow Swamp, I heard them all, but I never gave them much thought. Swamps were just swamps, muddy, mosquito-infested, but alive with weird beauty. So when my friends and I planned a weekend canoe trip through the deeper parts of Raven's Hollow, I was excited. The swamp was wild and mysterious, perfect for adventure. We packed tents, bug spray, and enough food for 2 days, ready to camp under the moss-draped trees and listen to the swamp's nocturnal symphony. The first day was peaceful. The canoe slipped silently through thick reeds and twisted roots, the water dark and still except for the occasional ripple of a fish or turtle. Dragonflies darted like tiny flashes of light, and the sun filtered through Spanish moss hanging like curtains from ancient cypress. We found a clearing, a small island of dry land surrounded by thick black water, and set up camp. The sun was low when we finished pitching our tents. As the sky turned from orange to purple, we built a fire, its crackling flames sending shadows dancing across the mossy trunks. That's when the swamp changed. The usual sounds faded away. The frogs stopped croaking. The cicadas quieted. Even the wind seemed to die. All around us, the swamp grew unnaturally still. And then we heard it, a soft, gurgling sound, like water bubbling somewhere just beyond the reeds. Probably just the swamp gas, Mark said, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. "I don't like this," Lisa whispered, pulling her jacket tighter. I tried to laugh it off, but my skin prickled. Something was watching us. Later, as darkness fell, the firelight flickered, revealing eyes, dozens of them, peeking from the water's edge, reflecting the flames in an unnatural green glow. I blinked, but they didn't disappear. The eyes stayed, unblinking, watching. "Cayman eyes," someone muttered. Maybe, I said, though I wasn't sure. These eyes didn't move like animals. They stayed perfectly still, locked on us. The whispering started then, not the kind of whispering you'd expect. The swamp didn't speak with words. It was more like a murmur of wind through the trees, but somehow, it felt like a warning. We gathered closer to the fire. No one spoke. The night deepened, and those eyes blinked in the dark. I wanted to leave, but the swamp had a hold on us, wrapping around our nerves like thick vines. Suddenly, the fire sputtered. Smoke curled toward the trees, and in its tendrils, I saw shapes. Shadowy figures moving among the cypress too fast to be real. Did you see that? I asked. Mark shook his head, eyes wide. Lisa grabbed my arm. Maybe it's just our imaginations running wild. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. We stayed huddled by the fire, daring not to look too far into the blackness. As the night wore on, the whispering grew louder. It wasn't angry, just insistent. Like the swamp wanted us to understand something, to respect it. At one point, I saw a faint light bobbing through the trees, like a will-o'-the-wisp. It flickered and danced, leading away from our camp into the dense fog. Should we follow it? Lisa asked, mesmerized. Absolutely not, Mark said firmly. That's how people get lost out here. We watched the light fade into the mist, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. When dawn finally broke, the swamp seemed to breathe out. The eyes vanished. The whispering ceased. The normal sounds of frogs and birds returned, as if nothing had happened. We packed up quickly, each of us stealing nervous glances behind as we paddled back through the reeds. I don't know what those eyes were or what the swamp was trying to tell us, but I know this. Raven's Hollow isn't just mud and trees. It's alive in ways we don't understand. And sometimes, when the night falls and the wind is just right, I swear I still hear the swamp whispering my name. I never thought I'd find myself in the middle of a swamp at night, let alone willingly. But when my friends dared me to spend an evening exploring the Mirkwillow Swamp, I couldn't back down. The swamp had always carried a reputation. Whispers of strange lights, eerie sounds, and the feeling that something unseen was always watching. It was the perfect place for a thrill. We arrived just before dusk, our small boat cutting through the thick, murky water. Thick moss draped from the cypress trees like ghostly curtains, and the air smelled damp and ancient. Frogs croaked somewhere, nearby, their calls bouncing off the still water. The sun sank behind a veil of mist as we pushed deeper into the swamp, the sky turning bruised purple and orange. Our flashlights bobbed like fireflies, illuminating twisted roots and strange shadows on the water's surface. It was beautiful, in a strange, haunting way. We anchored near a cluster of trees and set up a small campfire on a tiny patch of dry land. The flames flickered weakly against the rising fog, casting long, quivering shadows on the gnarled trees around us. The swamp was alive with sound. The splash of fish, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of an owl. But beneath the natural symphony, there was something else. A silence that felt like it belonged to the swamp itself, like a deep, ancient secret that didn't want to be uncovered. As the night grew darker, I noticed the shadows seemed to move, on their own. Shapes slipped between the trees just beyond the firelight. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, swamp animals or the way the fog played tricks with the light. But there was something different, something watching. My friends joked nervously about swamp ghosts and legends of lost souls, but I could see the unease in their eyes. Then I heard it, the softest whisper, carried on the thick night air. It wasn't words I could understand, just an eerie, breathy sound like a sigh weaving through the trees. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. They fell silent, straining to listen. The whispering stopped, replaced by the usual swamp sounds. We sat close to the fire, trying to laugh off the feeling that we weren't alone. but the eyes watching from the shadows didn't blink or move. They just stared. Hours passed, and the fire dwindled. I glanced into the darkness again and caught sight of a pale, misty figure drifting between the cypress trees. It moved with a slow, fluid grace, barely disturbing the fog. I froze. The figure seemed to look right at me, its empty face almost glowing in the dim light. "Guys," I said quietly, "there's something out there." Mark shone his flashlight toward the figure, but it vanished as if swallowed by the swamp. The whispering started again, closer this time, circling us like a cold breeze. We decided it was time to leave. As we pushed off in the boat, the mist thickened, wrapping around us like a shroud. The swamp seemed to hold its breath as we slipped through the water, the strange presence retreating but never quite leaving. By the time we reached solid ground, the first rays of dawn were breaking through the trees. The swamp looked peaceful again. No whispers, no eyes watching. I've never forgotten that night. The silent watchers, the ghostly figure, and the swamp's secret sighs. I don't know what we saw or heard, but one thing is clear. The Mirkwillow swamp keeps its secrets well, and it never forgets who visits. I never thought I'd find myself willingly wandering through a swamp at dusk, but when my friends dared me to explore Blackwater Swamp, I couldn't say no. The stories they told were enough to send shivers down anyone's spine. Disappearing. Hikers, strange lights flickering through the cypress knees, eerie voices carried by the mist. Still, curiosity gnawed at me. The swamp stretched out like a tangled maze of shadows and water, with gnarled trees dripping Spanish moss that swayed slowly in the humid breeze. The air smelled thick, a mix of wet earth, decaying leaves, and something metallic, sharp, and unsettling. I had a small flashlight and a weathered map, but neither prepared me for how silent the swamp really was. No buzzing insects, no croaking frogs, no bird calls. It was as if the swamp held its breath, waiting. The ground beneath me was a patchwork of muddy banks and shallow pools, the roots of ancient trees curling like giant claws through the water. My boots sank slightly with each step, the squelching, sounds muffled by the heavy air. I followed a narrow boardwalk that twisted deeper into the swamp, the wooden planks slick with moss. Every now and then, a ripple disturbed the black water, and I imagined something lurking just beneath the surface. My heart raced, but I told myself it was just fish or turtles. Then I heard it, a faint, almost inaudible murmur. At first, I thought it was the wind, but the air was still. The sound wasn't coming from the trees or water. It seemed to echo all around me, whispering just beyond comprehension. I froze, scanning the darkness. The murmur grew louder, but it wasn't words. It was a low chant, hypnotic and haunting, like a lullaby sung by unseen voices. Suddenly, a cold mist drifted in, curling around the cypress knees and creeping across the boardwalk. The murmur deepened, now joined by soft splashes, like footsteps moving through the water just out of sight. I swallowed hard, the hairs on my arms standing on end. The stories about Blackwater Swamp weren't just legends. Something ancient, awe stirred here. But I reminded myself, nothing bad has happened yet. I gripped my flashlight tighter and continued along the path, determined to see what I could find. As I rounded a bend, I spotted a flicker of light dancing between the trees. It wasn't a flashlight or a lantern. It shimmered like a will-o'-the-wisp, pale blue and wavering like a flame in a gentle breeze. My breath caught. The light hovered just above the water, bobbing softly, inviting me closer. Despite every instinct screaming at me to run, I felt drawn toward it, pulled by an invisible thread. I stepped onto a narrow log bridge, careful with each step, my eyes fixed on the glowing orb. The murmur grew into a chorus of voices, whispering in a language I couldn't understand, but somehow felt I almost remembered, like a forgotten memory brushing the edges of my mind. Suddenly, the light darted away, slipping through the trees like a playful spirit. I chased it deeper into the swamp, heart pounding, until the path vanished beneath tangled roots and dark water. I stopped. The voices ceased. For a moment, the swamp was silent. Again. Then the mist thickened, wrapping around me like a cold blanket. I stood still, breath shallow, waiting. From the mist emerged a figure, a silhouette of a woman, tall and thin, draped in tattered white robes that fluttered like smoke. Her face was hidden in shadow, but I could feel her eyes on me, watchful, curious, not threatening. She raised a hand, pointing to the far end of the swamp. I hesitated, but felt a strange calm wash over me. The fear dissolved into awe. Following her silent direction, I found a cluster of ancient trees encircling a small, natural spring. The water shimmered in the moonlight, pure and clear. The whispers returned, softer now, like a blessing. The figure faded into the mist, leaving behind only a faint scent of jasmine and rain. I realized then that the swamp wasn't trying to harm me. It was guarding something sacred, an ancient spirit tied to the land, watching over Blackwater. I made my way back along the boardwalk as dawn broke, the eerie whispers replaced by the gentle chorus of morning birds and insects returning to life. Told my friends the story when I got home, but they just laughed. "Swamp ghosts and will-o'-the-wisps," Mark said. "Sounds like you had one hell of a night." Maybe I did, but I know what I saw and heard, and I know I'll never forget. The whispers of Blackwater Swamp, or the silent guardian who watches its shadows. I never thought I'd be drawn to a place like Blackwater Swamp, but something about it called to me. Maybe it was the stories, whispers of ghostly lights flickering above the marsh, eerie voices carried by the mist, or shadowy figures glimpsed between the cypress knees. When my friends dared me to spend a night there, I couldn't back down. We arrived just before dusk, the sky burning orange over the tangled swamp. The air was thick with humidity, heavy with the scent of rotting leaves and stagnant water. Mosquitoes buzzed angrily around our faces as we unloaded the gear from the truck. Tents, food, flashlights. The swamp stretched out in every direction, an endless maze of dark water and twisted trees draped with Spanish moss. We found a small patch of solid ground near an ancient cypress tree, its wide, gnarled roots gripping the mud like claws. Setting up camp was harder than I expected. The ground was soft and uneven, the air alive with strange sounds. Frogs croaking, insects buzzing, and faint, almost human-like murmurs drifting on the breeze. As night fell, we lit a fire. The flames sputtered against the damp air, casting a weak glow that barely pushed back the shadows. The swamp seemed to lean in closer, the darkness thick and alive. Sitting around the fire, the three of us, me, Sarah, and Mike, tried to keep our nerves steady. We laughed at first, telling ghost stories and daring each other to explore the swamp's edges. But as the hours passed, the laughter grew quieter. The swamp's sounds shifted, from lively to sinister. Somewhere in the distance, a low moan floated across the water, like a breath from the earth itself. "Did you hear that?" Sarah whispered, eyes wide. Mike shrugged. "It's just the swamp. It makes weird noises." But it didn't sound natural. It was a sorrowful sound, a mournful cry that made the hairs on my arms rise. The swamp seemed to be alive, watching us, waiting. Then the whispering started. Soft, barely audible voices drifted through the trees, carried by the thick, still air. They weren't words I could understand, just murmurs that teased at the edge of hearing, like distant people talking underwater, voices blending with the rustling moss. I grabbed my flashlight and swept the beam across the swamp. For a moment, I thought I saw something. A flicker of movement, a shadow darting behind a tree. "Did you see that?" I asked, voice tense. No, Mike said, tightening his grip on his flashlight. You're just imagining things. But I wasn't imagining. The whispering grew louder, circling us like an unseen tide. The fire flickered, struggling to stay alive against the damp night air. Suddenly, a cold breeze rushed through the clearing, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of wet earth and decay and something else. Something faint, like perfume mixed with something metallic. Sarah gasped. I don't like this. I wanted to tell her it was nothing, just the swamp playing tricks on us. But I didn't believe it myself. Then, just at the edge of the firelight, I saw her. A figure, pale and translucent, drifting slowly between the cypress trees. She wore a long, flowing white dress that billowed like mist. Her hair hung loose, shimmering like silver in the firelight. She didn't walk. She floated, gliding over the swamp as if she belonged to it. I froze, heart pounding. The whispers swelled into a soft chorus, surrounding us. She's the lady of the swamp, Mike said, voice barely a whisper. Old legends say she's the spirit of a woman who died here long ago, searching for something she lost. The figure turned her head slowly, and though her eyes were hollow, I felt her gaze cut through the darkness straight to me. But she didn't come closer. She only lingered at the edge of the firelight, her presence both chilling and strangely peaceful. For a long time, none of us spoke. The fire crackled softly, the whispers faded to a gentle hum, and the lady drifted silently among the trees. Finally, she vanished into the mist as silently as she had appeared. We sat in silence, the eerie calm settling over us. The swamp felt different, less threatening, more like a place holding a secret, watching and waiting but not wanting to harm. When morning light spilled through the trees, the swamp returned to its usual noisy self. Frogs croaked loudly, birds sang, and the sun glinted off the still waters. We packed up, our nerves still raw but our bodies unharmed. Driving away, I glanced back at Blackwater Swamp, the mist swirling like smoke over the water's surface. Knew I'd never forget the night I met the lady of the swamp, the ghostly watcher who whispered in the shadows but left us to go on our way. Some places hold their secrets close, and sometimes it's best to listen to the whispers and leave, without looking back.